appears we probably will not reach the Paradiso today, but we might tomorrow morning if you want to come along. But there is a kind of, now having glimpsed the mountain, finished with the inferno, as it were, and the fact that now his guide tells him, as he's gone to the very depths, rise up upon thy feet, the way is long and difficult the road. We thought it was difficult enough on the descent. Now we come to the rise, the coming up. And so he begins, there's a prologue, which is a kind of anti-purgatory. I'm going a little slowly because I hope you'll interrupt with questions, but also I think it's useful to give some attention to some of the factors along the way. As I say, now we're beginning to enter the hall of learning. From the hall of ignorance, the hall of non-knowing, if you like, which we have to plumb to the very depths, we now turn to the condition of learning. And Dante begins the prologue, Canto 1 of the Purgatorio, to course o'er better waters now hoists sail the little bark of my wit, leaving behind her a sea so cruel, and I will sing of that second realm where the human spirit is purged and becomes worthy to ascend to heaven. Now, there is also a law here that I should mention because it may be familiar to the theosophical student in many ways, and that is that the individual in this condition must stay there as long as he has lived in the self-exclusion of non-penitence upon earth. So it's a real purging. To some extent, we find many parallels with what it is said we go through following death in terms of what's usually called the astral field or plane. However, there is another passage that towards the beginning of the Purgatorio that I think is very interesting, in which Dante says to his guide, Virgil, but if it please thee, willingly would I know how far we have to go, for the hillside rises higher than mine eyes can reach. And somebody here said I guess you said to me that you couldn't see the top of the mountain yet. All right. So the hillside rises higher than mine eyes can reach. And he to me, this mountain is such that ever at the beginning below 'tis toilsome, and the more a man ascends, the less it wearies. Therefore, when it shall seem to thee so pleasant that the ascending becomes to thee easy, even as in a boat to descend with the stream, then shalt thou be at the end of this path. There hope to rest thy weariness. No more I answer, and this I know for truth. So it's as though the more we, really get to climbing, the easier it becomes. But there is a kind of anti-purgatory in the prologue, where again he has to pass a kind of entrance examination. And here the entrance examination consists of the moral disciplines, very much again like the yama and niyama of the yoga systems. But there are two requirements here. Two requirements. One is he has to wash his face. Very interesting, isn't it? He has to wash his face, which means he has to sort of clean off the filth of the inferno. But the washing of the face is a kind of restoration of the organs through which one really perceives, you see. And then he has to have a girdle of reeds. Now it's interesting, you remember to go from the 8th to the 9th circle in the Infernal, he had to have a rope girdle, rather strong. Here, a girdle of reeds. This is again very interesting, and one can compare it to the famous story of Eros and Psyche in the Golden Ass, which we may or may not ever get to. But this is emblematic of a real humility. A real humility at this point, genuine humility. Now, note that he has seen the mountain, so a climb is essential. But there are places of waiting, and this is very interesting as one goes through it. There are places of waiting. And so, remember I said that it's in this, that a sense of time, and here he learns the discipline of time. That really, in that sense, one has to wait for the right moment, kairos, the right moment for the next step, and be willing to wait. And then one knows when the right moment is, when the next step is to be taken. In this anti-purgatory, there are really two terraces, and that is very interesting. He sees in this two terraces, and two of them. The first one really is very interesting that he notes here. It's the refusal, it's what we can call the refusal to, those people are there, the refusal of accepting what he calls the traditional wisdom. Helen Luke suggests in her interpretation of this that it's the wrong kind of, to use the Jungian term, individuation. That is to say, one has too hastily grasped at the thinking one has created the real self. One has come to the real self. It's the refusal of accepting the wisdom of the moment, the true wisdom. And therefore, the second terrace are what Dante calls the sinners against time. Now, there may not seem to be much difference between these two terraces, but there really is. This is the refusal. The sinners against time, according to Dante, are those who refuse to accept change.
So these really sort of plateaus?
They're plateaus, yes, you could call them. He calls them terraces. But they're plateaus, you see. People who are stuck because they have refused to accept the traditional wisdom, and because they've refused to accept change. There's an interesting suggestion that is made here that those who sin against time have refused to accept that death is possible and indeed necessary, because change is a death, you see. So they've refused to accept this. And as a result, they do not realize that the manner of one's death is implicit in one's life. Dante makes this point. The manner of one's death is implicit in one's life. Now, that can mean many things, and I think it often means that if we are willing to accept change, if we grasp it, if we know the right moment, that we die daily. You know, remember St. Paul's wonderful statement, I die daily, which is a wonderful statement, you see. It's a willingness, but if we are not willing to do that, then we become so preoccupied that, I haven't even time to die, let alone to live. sort of thing, that sort of thing. So it's at this point that a real transition occurs. And from that, then, from this point, he approaches what he calls Peter's Gate. Now we're about to enter. All of this has been preliminary. The outer room, as it were, you see. He's on his way out of in the inferno. He's in the outer room of purgatory. And he comes to Peter's Gate, he says. Very interesting. Here is Peter's Gate, you see. And there are 3 steps in Peter's Gate. Three steps, that is, that lead up to Peter's Gate. The first one is white. The second one, you can begin to guess the colors, is black. And the third one is red. These are the traditional colors of alchemy. This is the alchemical process. The whitening, the blackening, and the reddening. Sometimes there's a fourth one, the yellowing. But these are the 3 traditional colors of medieval alchemy. And so they really mark the necessity for the 3 steps that must be taken to enter into the purgatorial, to enter into a condition of learning through being purged.
Joy, what's the order of the steps? The first one is red.
White? No. The lowest is white. The top is red, you see. These are the traditional colors of medieval alchemy. The white one symbolizes confession. A clarity of consciousness now must be there. One makes a confession. So this is confession. The black one symbolizes the acceptance of the journey into darkness. That is contrition. You see. Yeah, I should have had that up higher. Yeah. Let's look at it. This is just at the entrance, you see. These all requirements. So now, to reach Peter's Gate, first step is white, which is confession. The second is black, the acceptance of the shadow, which is contrition. And the third one, of course, is red, as I've said. This is accepting the journey into the darkness. And the third one is red, which interestingly, according to Dante, signifies satisfaction. Now that we have to look at a little bit.
Can we look at contrition a little bit?
Yes, contrition is, what is it to be contrite? Yes, and so that's an acceptance of the journey into darkness. To say, I'm contrite. I did do that. I'm sorry, but I did do that. I do have those elements within me. I'm willing to face those elements within me. Is to be contrite, isn't it?
Is it humility?
That,
Is it humility within contrition?
yes, there is a humility, but there is a little bit more, isn't there? Do you see?
Sure, there's an acceptance that there has to be change.
An acceptance, there has to be change, yes. That's why it's a blackening in the alchemical terminology. But now, this satisfaction is that, all right, I have accepted responsibility for all of it, and therefore I'm willing to embrace passion, suffering. Satisfaction, as it were. And that's what he calls it, is satisfaction. It's generally translated that way. So now, having ascended those 3 steps, I hope there's some good masons here, he has to give 3 knocks. But he doesn't give them on the door, on his own breast. So what is Peter's gate? Yes, you see, in one sense, you see, it's been interpreted, mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa, you see. But what else is it? Symbolic, you see. Why? Because Peter's gate is within you. Isn't it? You see. And it's very interesting. And therefore, by giving these 3 knocks on his own breast, all excuses are at an end. No more excuse making. No more excuses, you see. And with that, the angel at the gate writes P on his forehead 7 times. And it's interesting because as he goes on, one P after another, Piccata, you see. These are the 7, Piccatum, the 7 deadly sins, you see. So 7 P's, Piccatum. And so at this point, you see, at this point, a complete honesty is demanded. You cannot get away from it. A complete and utter honesty is demanded.
What do you mean by Piccata?
I sin. You see, the 7 deadly sins. So it's very interesting, you see, because in one of the letters, in the Mahatma letters, this is referred to in a sense in the Buddhist terminology of avarice and sloth, and forgotten what all the sins are in the Buddhist tradition have to be removed before one achieves liberation. And in every tradition, so one has to look at what is meant by sin, of course. The word really means to miss the mark, as we know. It's to sort of go off in the wrong direction, to shoot the arrow and it misses its mark, as it were. These are the blunders that Odysseus has made, as we've said. They can be the instinctive forces that have built up the personal ego consciousness, the personality, that have given strength to the personal self. These are, yes, the ego, you see. These are the sins, if you like. So we have to be completely honest about it. And now it's interesting. At this point, then, after that, he is given 2 keys. 2 keys. One is of gold and one is of silver. The gold, of course, symbolic, emblematic of the sun of consciousness. The rising sun of consciousness, the gold key. He must now be really awake. All right, you say, well, he woke up in the middle of a dark wood, but that wasn't. Now he must really be awake. And the silver is the key that unlocks his unconscious motivations. It's always a reflection of consciousness and that which is still buried in the unconscious. Unconscious motivations, you see. So from this point on, now he is told there can be no looking back. No looking back. Very symbolic. And in all the stories, all the great myths, there is a moment when the hero, the heroine is told, look, you've come this far, you cannot look back. What happens to you if you look back? Turn into a pillar of salt, or worse things yet. That's right, you see. So now he is really committed. So no looking back. All right.
What about the disobedience? You mentioned the tea table.
Yes. But it often comes in here, you see, that I'm convinced there is a kind of yoga of disobedience. I wrote an article on it once, which got published in some theosophical journal, I've forgotten where, that at some points, that's what I mean by the betrayal of the friend. There is a kind of yoga of disobedience. And this is necessary at some stage. But at this point, if he's going to enter purgatory, he cannot look back. You see, the door is closed behind him. He's through Peter's gate, the door slams shut tight behind him. But there are moments when we have to look, we're forced to look back in a sense. It's as though we're told, don't look back, but you have to. You have to disobey. From a Gnostic point of view, you see, it was the disobedience that brought about the whole system, wasn't it? Powerful disobedience.
Just going back now, Steph, I've been intrigued about the P on the forehead 7 times. I think emblematically the P is almost interchangeable with the R. The R for red. And it can be associated with a cross sword.
Oh, yes.
And is as it were, a royal sign on the forehead.
On a forehead.
Possibly relates to the
It may well, because you see what happens. As I say, what happens, as you know, in the Purgatorio is that at every level, whatever he meets, there is also the excess of that, which appears to be a virtue. And that's what it seems to me Light on the Path is also saying, in essence, in that wonderful statement, you see, that the steps, all steps are necessary. And why does it mention the vices first? The vices become steps in the ladder. The virtues of man are steps indeed. Yes, all right. But
it's almost as though it's being indicated
yes,
that completion is there and is possible.
yes.
It's embryonic.
Yes, this is true. It really is. So now, at this point, you see, he is ready to enter the purgatorio, you see. So now, you see, we come to the purgatorio. Now, you remember how many divisions there were in the Inferno? 9, divided into 3. Here, there are 3 divisions. It's very interesting to note these again, you see. There are 3 divisions marked by first 3 lower terraces, as he calls them, circles, but he calls them terraces, rather narrow, 3 lower terraces.
Is this the ascent proper?
This is the beginning of the ascent proper. He's through Peter's gate, through the the outer room. He's gotten in, he's knocked 3 times, the door is opened. All of this has happened, you see, and he's been admitted. So here he finds the proud, the envious, and the wrathful. and these 3 lower terraces. And then on the 4th, terrace, he finds the slothful and the careless. And then the upper 3, so that's by itself, and the 3 upper terraces. He finds the covetous, the gluttonous. It's interesting to compare these. I didn't bring the comparison along, but it's interesting to compare these with the steps in the Buddhist tradition of what one must divest oneself of, and the lustful.
It's actually interesting to the characteristics of these different qualities.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Like the first 3 seem to be potentially aggressive.
Yes.
The 4th one is sort of indifferent.
Mm-hmm.
And the next 3 are dynamically aggressive.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it interesting to note the development there, you see? Now, the 4th is very important. This is a very significant one, because this 4th terrace, again, the 4th, remember, is always a transition point. And in a sense, there are 2 lessons out of sloth and carelessness. One, sloth is a whole poisoning of the will, if you like. It's a total poisoning of that energy that is the will, you see. And the carelessness is because of in a sense, the carelessness is because one is too hasty.
Insufficient attention.
Insufficient attention, you see. And in a sense, these are the reverse. These are the inverted characteristics of impatience and constant hurry, aren't they? They're in a sense the reverse of impatience and constant hurry. When we're impatient, you see, the reverse of that is slothfulness. So where is the mean? Where is the mean between? And when we're in a constant hurry, we become careless, don't we? You see. It's very interesting.
Is there a tie-up with the animals?
Yes, one can see.
Does that mean that we've all been sloths?
Probably so. It may well be. It may well be. Now, it's at this point, you see, I'm not going through this completely because there just isn't time for it, and I've really given you an awful lot to be thinking about today, so, and without very much time in between to talk back, and not many exercises other than disidentifying yourself, in a sense. But at this point, the whole scene changes, as it were. These are the terraces, and of course, there's a tremendous amount in the Purgatorio, and it's absolutely fascinating to read some of it. You see that of what happens. You see of. I don't know that I can pick out particular passages, but a tremendous amount is going on. No, I really can't pick out special passages without doing the whole thing. But there's a lot he sees a great, of course, he meets various people on these different terraces, you see. And he comes out on these different circles and so on, or terraces, as they're often called. And he meets individuals who symbolize and who really embody these characteristics. And he's surprised at some of them, because he says to some of them, I didn't think you were gluttonous. And then the individual may say, well, it wasn't a gluttony of the body, but it was a gluttony of the mind, or a gluttony of the emotions, you see. This is the thing, because gluttony isn't just physical gluttony. It's not just food, you know. I have a gluttony for books. I collect books like mad, you see. It's a kind of gluttony, perhaps, I don't know. But you see, perhaps we insufficiently digest ideas, take them in. We're gluttonous for ideas. We want to know everything at once, you see, and so on. Perhaps I don't have physical lust, but there may be other forms of lust. How do we know? You see, you have to look very carefully. I may not covet your possessions, but I sure covet your standing, you know. It'd be great to be national president. Not so great after all, is it, Hugh? Anyway, you see. But you have to look at these very carefully, you see. What is it to be slothful, you see? Maybe there is a certain, what I call rhythmic laziness that's necessary. It's a state to which I aspire, which I'm never able to achieve, to be rhythmically lazy. But maybe someday, you see. Anyway, at this point, there is a saving image, as it were, he says. And the saving image is, of course, love. And it's that will carry him out. This is the saving image. It requires depth and loyalty. It requires commitment. It requires freedom to choose. The freedom to choose. It is unconditional trust and absolute surrender. And he's told this. And so, in one sense, at this point, as he concludes the journey through the Purgatorio, he realizes, we get to the whole theme, in a sense, of the whole Commedia. In which now the final, I don't know that I can again find the seven virtues, you see, in alternate strains, now proclaim with tears that the forces of the world have found their hour. Beatrice declares that through her glory, and this is just a summary of the final canto, 33. There are 33 cantos in the Purgatorio, incidentally. Again, that number 3, which is rather interesting if you're into numerology and so on. There are 33 cantos, divisions in the Purgatorio. I've forgotten how many in the Inferno. There are 34 in the Inferno, 33. And so now Beatrice declares that though her glory will for a time be withdrawn, it is but for a season. And Dante now begins to interpret everything he's seen, everything he knows, and begins to see, he's now recognizes that there has to be the freedom to choose. And this is really at the heart of the Commedia. The freedom, it's a testimony to freedom, our complete freedom to choose between truth and error. This is what makes us human. This makes us endure the inferno and climb the mountain of the purgatorio. This freedom to choose. At every moment, there is the freedom to choose. We have to make a choice. And so then he can enter into the Paradiso. And there we have, you see, it's interesting, you know, I think it's in the Voice of the Silence, as you, in the hall of wisdom, where we are told, look for him who is to give thee birth. You see, this is the hall of wisdom, and it's in that hall that we begin to see the new path, the new being, and how we will come into that new being. Can't remember just where that statement is, but it's in the Voice of the Silence. But look for him in this hall who is to give thee birth. And so what characterizes the Paradiso is the symbol of light, both single light and patterned light. And so we have in the Paradiso 10 heavens, as I say. Very interesting. It's now that Dante, from this, because this is indeed the ultimate lesson, the guiding light, he sees now it is not punishment, it is indeed the hall of learning, it's education. There's payment for one's debts, you see. Know ye not you were bought with a price, and you have to pay the price. You see, early on he has said, like Parzival, go I will, cost what it may. And so he is willing to recognize, because while he sees these as the shades, as the ghosts, if you like, they're called shades, of the departed ones who symbolize these are all within us. Don't think they're somebody else's, you know. They're all within us, you see. And at each stage, one of the P's is removed from his forehead, you see. He's now free of it, as it were. We have to be free of it. And so at this point, we can say, because of this, because of recognizing this, Dante becomes transhumanized. Transhumanized. So it's a freedom, because he now is recognizing, he remembers his true identity, and enlightenment really is the remembrance of who we really are. What is your true identity? Or as I often say, what is the original face of the self? The original face of the self. So it's at that point. Well, I haven't gone through the Paradiso. We might in the morning, if you'd like, look a bit at some of it. There are some points that we need to perhaps pick up in the Paradiso. I've already mentioned what happens in the eighth, and these various circles of them. But the final message, there's another translation that's a beautiful translation, poetic translation, of the final verse of the final canto of the Paradiso. In the Paradiso, there are how many cantos? I think 33 or 34. I think it may be 33. Yes, 33. 33 in the Purgatorio, 33 in the Paradiso. Again, that fabulous number of 3, you see. And I read you the one from this translation, which is said to be one of the most authentic translations, generally referred to by scholars, you see. But there's a beautiful poetic translation. My will and my desire were turned by love the love that moves the sun and the other stars. Isn't it a beautiful ending? My will and my desire were turned by love. But he meets this at the end of the Purgatorio. You see, now it carries him up the rest of the mountain. Love, he finds, is the center of the universe and all creation. It is there fully. It's the supreme realization that there is indeed this at the center of the universe. It is a universe of love. That even though he didn't see it or would become aware of it in the inferno, at the end of the Purgatorio, that is what emerges, which is love. My will and my desire were turned by love, the love that moves the sun and the other stars. So Dante's journey, I think, is our journey. This is the spiritual journey. There's much more, as I say, that one can examine. In the third heaven, he comes to know who the four kinds of lovers that represent four types of total commitment. All of these things in the various heavens that he goes through. Again, he's told to look well, total attention. He's reminded again and again of total attention. Incidentally, in the eighth heaven, he is also told that the original sin, you know what the original sin is? Haste. Haste. The original sin is haste, because it's born of our awareness of time, and yet it's the sense of time that is awakened here. But that, according to Dante, is really the original sin, is haste. You see, and it's very interesting. You know, there are, I should stop pretty soon, but there are many creation myths in which one of the motifs is that the human being was made too hastily. So there are flaws in us because, you know, there's a wonderful creation myth that man was made too hastily. And so he was half-baked. Well, maybe he was you see. But this is very interesting. He speaks of that. Again and again, you see, is this. But then there, at the 10th heaven, at the center is the white rose, a new power of seeing, a new state of consciousness, you see. But he is also aware that there can be no bypassing of the human state. No bypassing of the human state. Well, as I say, there's much more, but Dante's journey is ours. We too struggle up the mountain of consciousness, if you like. We must pass through fire and water until we face what Dante did, the responsibilities of joy, the responsibilities of joyousness. You see, in this supreme vision, as it were. Well, tomorrow we'll look at a couple more, and I'm going to engage you in a little exercise. There might be some more I'll say about Dante, but probably not. So we have enough to do tomorrow. All right. Any final questions? Any?
Just an observation.
Yes.
You mentioned that quite right at the end about that moves the sun and the stars.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty good thought for the Middle Ages, pre-Copernicus.
Mm-hmm. It is, but don't underestimate that the Middle Ages didn't know that the sun, you see, but this was all metaphorical, you see. After all, this was known from antiquity that the earth moves around the sun. You see, it's not that they were stupid and thought that the earth was, you know, the center of the universe. But what was the center was the fact that the human being is the center. And the self, the universal self, is the sun. Do you see? So, and all that revolves around. So this, one has to go into the depths of the meaning of these great metaphors and images. Now, true, the exoteric rendering was that the Earth was the stable point and the sun revolved around it, you see. And the Copernican revolution, of course, was the proving that this wasn't so, and so it came to be common knowledge. But esoterically, it was always known. It was certainly known by Pythagoras. It was known very early on. It was recognized. It was certainly recognized in India, the early, in the Upanishadic times. It was known, you see. But what is given us, you see, which was the knowledge of the common folk, as it were, took it exoterically. But esoterically, it was always known, because the sun was always the symbol of that universal self. And so humanity, then, must awaken that self, which is the image of the universal. So one has to be very careful in this, that we think, oh, these people were pretty dumb. They didn't know that the earth revolves around the sun. They did. But it was a geocentric universe from the point of view of the esoteric tradition. Because for our humanity, this is the center, isn't it? Do you see? This is our home.
Let us say it's not this universe without you, nothing would exist to you.
Without
If you wasn't there, nothing would exist to you.
That's right. Yes. It's true. Yes. It's true. Well, thank you very much. I'll see you in the morning, I hope.